I put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it. And I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back. And I mean it.
A body racked with head injuries, open sores, bone fractures, and broken needles in his arms, an apparent victim of terrible neglect and abuse. But this was no ordinary derelict. This was Howard Hughes.
They said, if you took one look at me, you could never represent me.
How could this happen to the richest man in America?
Broadcasting live from the dark and cold dungeons deep beneath the KLAV studios in Las Vegas, Nevada. Prepare yourselves to be taken away into another dimension as we now have control over your thoughts, fears, and perspective of the unexplained world you dare not speak of. With your hosts, Lindsay Knight and Michael Knight. Ladies and gentlemen, we now open the gates to the paranormal and beyond.
Broadcasting live from the KLAV studios in Las Vegas, Nevada, this is the Paranormal and Beyond. On December 24th, 1905, Eileen Stone Gano would give birth to a boy who would soon later grow up to revolutionize the entire world as we know it. As an American business magnate, investor, aviator, aerospace engineer, filmmaker, and philanthropist, there is no doubt that business tycoon and icon Howard Hughes, on which his contributions and impact on today's society cannot be ignored. However, what has gone ignored is the secret life of Howard Hughes himself and how he fooled the entire world by faking his death in 1976. In a moment, special guest Douglas Wellman and retired Major General Mark Musick will be joining us on the program to share a shocking story of a recluse, wealthy man who was unable to escape his famous life, but in the end did so with the assistance of the CIA and also help from a loving wife who knew how to keep secrets. So get ready to hear the secret life of Howard Hughes when we return right here on the Talk of Las Vegas, KLAV 1230 AM.
Your ticket to the unknown is at knightsParanormalResearchSociety.com. UFOs, ghosts, aliens, hauntings, mysterious places, and more can be found at knightsParanormalResearchSociety.com. Knights with a K, ParanormalResearchSociety.com. Based out of Las Vegas, Nevada, Knights Paranormal Research Society is owned and operated by the renowned brother and sister team of Michael and Lindsay Knight. Seeing is believing. And at knightsParanormalResearchSociety.com, you're going to believe. Join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight for the Paranormal and Beyond. Join host Michael Knight and Lindsay Knight as they investigate the unexplained and most controversial mysteries of the world. The Paranormal and Beyond, where the paranormal lives on and conspiracies exposed. The Paranormal and Beyond, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight. Brought to you by knightsParanormalResearchSociety.com.
Just because you've seen it in the news doesn't mean it's real.
So you're telling me you got physically attacked by a ghost?
Like I can tell you right now, I believe in the paranormal more than I believe in our government.
There are so many mysteries out there that are still yet to be explained.
You folks have some of your facts wrong, and you just keep talking about generalities.
With all due respect, sir, you have not brought anything to the table to prove us wrong.
This is the Paranormal and Beyond, and it's your show. Call us at 731-1230. Here again, Michael Knight and Lindsay Knight.
Welcome back to another brand new and conspiratorial edition of the Paranormal and Beyond. But first, be sure to check us out at Knight's Paranormal Research Society.com, where you can link up to all the past shows by simply clicking on that archive link above. That's Knight's Paranormal Research Society.com. Ever want to be an actor? Well, here's your chance, because by logging on to Hollywood-bound Acting Academy.com, you will get the best in coaches when it comes to acting. Once again, that's Hollywood-bound Acting Academy.com. Special shout out to all those listening worldwide through the KLAV 1230 AM.com website, and all those driving around in the Vegas Valley listening to us on your stereos. I'm your host, Michael Knight. Joining alongside of me is your hostess, Lindsay Knight, and also in the studios, David Gleason and Kevin Stott of the EOG Sports Hour, which can be heard here Monday through Friday from 10 to 11. Welcome to the program, people.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Woo. Jesus. Try
Are you
saying
all right?
that 10 times.
That was good. You killed it, man.
Yeah, it's like I don't have time to breathe. I'm physically shaking right now.
James Brown thinks you're a hardworking man. You're now the hardest working man in show business.
Oh, yeah. All right, we got a great show. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the whole Howard Hughes thing. Since us being in Vegas, we all hear that Desert Inn story. You
right.
know?
I'm actually, not to pull rank on you here, but I'm actually something of an authority on Howard Hughes' time in
Uh-oh.
Vegas. Yes, I've read a lot about it. I'm kind of a Vegas history geek.
Yeah, he's done a lot in
And actually,
Vegas.
my dad's a aviation geek, so I've actually I have good familiarity with Howard Hughes. We'll just leave
No,
it
you
at that.
can't pull rank on me because I'm not a geek.
No, I know that. You're the man. You're the real rock and roller.
All right, let's get into our main topic, because our first guest, Douglas Wellman, and author of the book Box is the Secret Life of Howard Hughes, has been a TV producer, director for 41 years, and parallel to that, for the last 16 years, the assistant dean of the School of Cinematic Arts at the University of Southern California, where Douglas retired in August. At the present, Douglas is currently working as a consultant to film schools. Joining us on the program as well is retired Major Mark Musick, who upon graduating from Dana College immediately went into the United States Air Force, spending 8 years on active duty prior to returning home and joining the Nebraska Air National Guard, to later retire from the military altogether in 2008 at the rank of Major General. At the time of his military career, Mark was the commander for the Nebraska Air National Guard, the assistant adjutant general for the Air National Guard in Nebraska, and his final position was the mobilization assistant for deputy commander of the United States Strategic Command at Offutt Air Force Base. To this day, Mark is currently the managing director for an Omaha company, Prairie Ventures, working to expand and support the telemedicine capability of the veterans hospitals in Nebraska and in western Iowa to improve medical access to rural Nebraskans through telemedicine technology. The Paranormal and Beyond would like to welcome to the program retired Major General Mark Musick and Douglas Wellman. How are you both doing? Yes.
Well, good evening, gang. Michael and company, happy to be on the show. This is Doug.
How are you doing, Doug?
Very good.
Mark, do we have you as well?
And this is Mark. I'm on. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. This story, you know, when you first contacted the station, this story was just mind-blowing, because we love to do conspiracies here. But would you consider this a conspiracy or just something swept under the rug?
I think you'd have to consider it both, because the premise of this book is that Howard Hughes essentially was so tormented by his many business dealings and people just trying to get at him that he needed to escape, to hide, and to do that he needed a little bit of assistance. And I think that's where you would have the conspiracy coming in. We believe there's a conspiracy with the CIA with whom he was intimately involved for a long time. So, Michael, I'd say it's a little bit of both.
So how did you get into first investigating this?
Well, that's a question for Mark. I came in a little further down the line. General Musick was the one who uncovered the story, so perhaps Mark can take it.
Let me fill you in a little bit. In 2002, I met a lady named Eva McClelland, and she lived in Alabama, and she started telling me this story. And the story was that she was married to Howard Hughes. Well, I knew her husband had just died about 2 months earlier. And I thought, the Howard Hughes? And she said, yes, the Howard Hughes. And I said, but Eva, Howard Hughes died 25 years ago. And she said, that's what they want you to think. And then she started telling me the story, and it was just wild. It took me a good 2 years to even come to even close to believing what she was telling me. But as I went back to different locations that they lived and looked at records and researched it, I found out that everything that she was telling me all fit into this puzzle. And the puzzle is that she met a very handsome man in Panama it was November of 1969, who always had AIDS around him. And she got to know him a little bit, and then he just disappeared in December 69, January 70. They got back together again in February of 70. They were engaged in March of 70, and they were married in May of 70. And she knew there was mystery with this man, but she didn't know exactly what it was all about. And then it took her about 3 years to figure out this guy is really Howard Hughes under a different identity.
So the end result she did find out completely.
Yes, she did. He actually told her it was 1974 and 75. And he told her, and she said, well, I knew it by then anyway, because she had put the pieces together. And then after that, the discussion that they had, he would answer any questions that she asked about flying the Spruce Goose or the Hercules, or about his Senate hearings in 47, or flying around the world in 38. He would answer all these questions for her.
Okay, the main question is, who was that guy in the Desert Inn who was emaciated, long fingernails, the long hair, the scruffy guy that everybody thought was Howard Hughes?
Well, Michael, the historical record, the record of sightings of Howard Hughes bear out the point that there have to be two guys. I know we sent you a little information sheet, just a couple of examples that you've got. The Howard Hughes character alternates between being this 98-pound, walking cadaver, and then 2 weeks later, he's meeting with stockbrokers. He's completely coherent. He's meeting with the head of the Nevada Gaming Commission, and then he goes back to being this crazy long-haired guy somewhere else, and then he turns up flying airplanes as the normal Howard in London. If you put all of these pieces together end to end, there obviously are two very distinct Howard Hughes characters. There have to be, because this person can't keep growing hair and fingernails and losing 50, 60 pounds of weight every 2 weeks.
That's not possible.
So then the question is, okay, if there are two characters, then which one is which? And it's our contention that the one in the Desert Inn is the crazy guy, because Hughes had so many lawsuits and so many actions against him at that point. He had no peace. The man had no peace and quiet. And so the only way that he could really keep people away from him, he could hide. He could hide, but he couldn't stop them from looking. Mm-hmm. So what better than to hide in plain sight except be a crazy guy?
Yeah.
So we don't know the identity of that guy who was in the Desert Inn. We speculate he was a local drug addict who, fit the basic physical characteristics, and we really don't know.
Yeah, to this day, we have no shortage of crazy drug addicts in the Las Vegas Valley. Let me ask you a question. When I first heard about this, I'm David Gleason. I'm kind of the Las Vegas era Hughes, authority of the show. What fascinated me is if Hughes wasn't calling the shots, he made some pretty brilliant business moves here in Nevada, buying what's now the Summerlin community. Who's calling the shots? Was he calling the shots through his surrogates, or was this basically the Mormon Mafia running the show?
Well, we believe that he was in control of this thing all the way. I mean, Robert Mayhew was theoretically driving things for a long time, but he and Hughes had a falling out. But as far as we can determine, you have to consider that also that Hughes controlled communication satellites. He was building them. He could do anything he wanted to do from anywhere he wanted to do it. And so we believe that actually he had escaped to Panama, and that's where he met Eva McClellan. And he had a contingent of people with him, his little Mormon cadre.
Right.
We believe that he was actually personally directing everything from everywhere they went. And when he was supposed to be crazy, he was also buying the airline there in Vegas. It just escaped my mind.
Hughes Air West. What became Hughes
Air West.
Yeah.
He bought, I think, the Lady Luck Casino or the Golden
Silver Slipper. Yeah, and rumor
Silver
has
Slipper.
It, right. Yeah,
all of that was happening when this man was supposed to be essentially a vegetable.
Right.
And then he pops up when he buys all these casinos and puts himself in danger of an antitrust rap from the government. Suddenly he pops up, and the guy that was who had bones sticking through his skin is suddenly a very articulate businessman who can meet with the Nevada Gaming Commission. These are two guys. This is not one person.
As far as your knowledge goes, how deeply involved was he with the CIA, and did they have any help in him partly disappearing?
Well, that's another theory we have. Along about the same time, of course, he was building the Glomar Explorer a ship, which was posing as a deep-sea mining vessel. In fact, it was a ship that he had built for the CIA specifically to raise a sunken Soviet submarine, because they wanted the technology, they wanted the code books and everything. So right about the time he was doing the Disappearing Act, and the crazy person appeared, he was also doing this massive $200 million deal for the CIA. The speculation that Mark and I have at this point is that he may have made that part of the deal. Look, I'll build you this ship to help you raise the submarine, but you're going to have to give me a little help as well. And at this same period, there was a man that we know who had worked contract work for the CIA. He had disappeared, and he suddenly reappeared 2 years later, except he'd grown 4 inches, and his eye color and hair color had changed. And so our speculation is that as part of the deal to make the boat for the ship for the CIA, they gave him the identity of a dead CIA agent. And that's what he was using when he met Eva.
Hey, Doug, this is Kevin Stott. I want to ask you, do you think somebody could pull off the Panama thing in this day and age, getting away with what he got away with back then?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier. Imagine if Bill Gates had control of a communications industry, had control of airlines and travel and espionage and all kinds of technology. What could Bill Gates do today if he wanted to? Right. And so take this back a few years, and you have a billionaire who has his finger in all of these things, plus intimate connections within the government, running right up to the presidency in the case of Richard Nixon. Could it happen today? I absolutely do think it could happen today. And of course, Mark and I are both convinced that it did happen then.
Right, and just you're just being kind of always fascinated with this kind of thing. There's more technological oversight now, but there's also more tools you have due to that technology. So it's I think that kind of balances out. And you also have to remember there was less oversight as far as international money transfers then, a lot of other things that he would have to use to facilitate his lifestyle.
I'm thinking the media in this day and age would go crazy over something like this to try and find out the truth. If Howard Hughes was
they go
in Panama.
They go into their next thing.
Yeah, you're probably right. It could be a Britney Spears story. Yeah. You never know.
They're so easily distracted now.
All right, here's another question. Being the man Howard Hughes is with his wealth, why would he even do this and consider this and just like disappearing? Didn't this guy enjoy the limelight?
Well, not in the later years of his life. I mean, he was tormented at one point. Mark, I don't remember exactly how many lawsuits he had. Was it 40 lawsuits against him, Mark?
In 1973, Howard Hughes was in London. He had just flown some airplanes in the summer of '73, and the person flew in with him said he was a commanding, charming, friendly, handsome man. And then 6 weeks after that, Howard Hughes falls in the hotel in London, and the doctor comes in and sees him and says, "You're kidding me." It's a 90-pound, bone sticking through his skin, totally mentally incompetent man at that point in time. And at that point in time, he had 20 lawsuits against him. And so to be declared mentally incompetent was probably a pretty good plan on his behalf, because it's awfully hard to enforce a lawsuit against a man that's mentally incompetent.
Mark, let's talk. I mean, I know we've had this conversation in the past. I want to talk a little bit about his funeral, because you told me that there was only a certain amount of people that came to the funeral, and majority of those people weren't even people that he was associated with.
The funeral was in 1976, and he supposedly died on April 4th, 1976. At that point in time, Eva and Nick was the identity that he was using, were living in a little small house west of Troy, Alabama, and they were listening on the radio to the news, the latest news at that point in time, which was Howard Hughes had just died. And Eva makes the comment to Nick and says, the public is going to realize something is really strange here because they're trying to get this gentleman in the ground too quickly. And Nick says to Eva, you really know who your friends are when you fake your death and see who shows up at the service.
True.
And at the service was 25 people. 24 of them were family members, cousins, most of whom he'd never met. And the 25th one was a CIA agent.
Huh.
And why would anyone just say that out of the blue?
Right.
You know, you wouldn't just make that up. Why would you be in any context to ask that rhetorical question unless she was going through it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, him using the secret identity Nick, did he ever divulge this to anyone else besides Eva, or was it just her that pretty much just knew he was Howard Hughes?
Well, we believe that there were a couple of people who knew this was going on, because obviously he did need to do business through some of his aides. He had some very trusted aides. We believe that, as far as we can tell, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that the former Lockheed executive, Jack Reel, was probably Hughes's only real friend, you know, in a sense where he wasn't really a business associate. He wasn't something else. He was just a guy that he liked. And we think that Reel may have known. He certainly knew a lot more than anybody else, but we think he kept it pretty close. We don't think that many people in the Hughes organization, or practically none, really, with the exception of a couple of aides, and Eva, really knew this was going on. Hughes was an incredibly secretive man even before all of this. Right. He was passionate. He was obsessed not just with his privacy, but in going through all of this material, it almost feels like he took some sort of perverse pleasure in messing with people to just confuse them about who he was and what he was. And like it was a game that he sort of enjoyed.
That brings up a good point. Of course, a lot of the more the interesting aspects of his time in Las Vegas were his eccentricities. He reportedly bought KLAS TV because at the time there were no 24-hour TV stations in Las Vegas. And he was known for, they start showing a movie and he wouldn't like it. He'd make a call and they'd switch the movie at that point. And there are just so many stories like this. And obviously, if he's out of the country, he's not doing this. Was this was this the crazy guy, you think, or was this just part of the narrative, which obviously would be a good distraction to throw people off the case?
Well, in the case of Hughes, it's almost all bets are off at any given time, because he had the power to do anything. And I think that gets back to what I just said a moment ago. It's almost like it's a game, and sometimes I think he just messed with people because he could.
Yeah, there's just so many great stories like that he had a sandwich put up in a tree every night because he'd get hungry and he wouldn't want to go anywhere, so he'd reach out to this tree and find a sandwich. And there's just so many of these stories.
Yeah, leave it to Howard Hughes to do something like that, right?
Yeah, and so obviously it kind of feeds into the narrative of he's crazy now, but it sounds almost like a little like he had some hand in it, because it's just they're just such clever little touches that I don't think a disheveled drug addict would have come up with them.
No, I think what you have here is an example of a highly intelligent and also extremely eccentric man who brilliantly figured out how to throw everybody off
Right.
his trail. I don't think that. I mean, in going through the material, I really don't know for sure. I don't think meeting a woman and falling in love with her were really in his plans. I think he just wanted to be somewhere else and play with airplanes and just hide.
Yeah.
Hey,
I
Doug,
don't think.
Doug, do you think the lawsuits sort of stemmed this behavior? That maybe was the spark?
Oh, absolutely. I
Okay.
think that had a lot to do with it. I don't think it was the entire story, but I think the idea of taking someone, creating the mystery of the crazy person who essentially you couldn't really enforce any legal documents on him. Much of the Hughes empire was, I mean, totally owned by him at that
Right.
point. It wasn't like public corporations. So I think that certainly creating the crazy character was a component, a legal component in that, a legal device. But also, I don't know.
Well, a lot of this.
It was also relatively believable because he was eccentric enough where if you say, gee, I think Howard Hughes might be going crazy, people will go, well, yeah, he always was a little odd.
Yeah, that makes sense. And
Well, a lot of this story came out because of Eva McClellan herself. And both of you had contact directly with this woman, have you?
Yes.
Okay, describe this woman. How did she come into this, what is it, Nickley or Nicely?
Well, that the original man was named Werner Nicely, and when he disappeared, when he came back as Nickley. So not only did he
Pronounce
grow
it a little bit different.
yeah,
Ooh,
yeah,
clever.
That'll fool me. Yeah.
But Mark was the one who really he knew Eva much better than I did, and I mean he spent I don't know how many hours, days, weeks with her, and I mean my interaction with her, I thought she was a very articulate, very intelligent woman, but Mark knew her for many years. I think Mark is really the key to the mystery of Eva.
Yeah, I first met Eva, as I said, in 2002. And she was a very classy lady. She liked chocolate, and she liked Pepsi. She liked classical music, and she was very paranoid. She would not talk over the phone about what we're talking about here, and she would not say anything about it unless we were outside in a car driving around. And I went back several times, probably 5, 6, 7 times. And the thing I noticed, because I didn't believe her at first, and the thing I noticed was that nothing ever changed in her story. No dates changed, no locations changed, even words that she had between herself and her husband in certain episodes of her life. They were the exact words that she'd say time and time again. And so nothing ever changed in her. She had a great memory. We were even asking her questions. She died in November of 2009. And we were actually asking her questions 2 weeks prior to that, and she was answering them just like she'd answered them, 5, 6 years earlier. So she was very much with it. She had some resemblance of Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah, that's actually was going to be my next question. If she, some of the earlier pictures of her, does she fit the Hughes profile? He had a certain type. He liked actresses, specifically quick-witted, intelligent actresses. So that kind of fits into that narrative as well.
Yeah, we have the pictures in the book, and she does look very much like
Lindsay won't let me look at it, though.
Elizabeth Taylor, and also she, I guess, implied or told Nick that she was a little younger than she really was. So he thought she was 35. She was actually 44 when they got married, which didn't make him very happy when he found out. but she bared a very strong resemblance to Elizabeth Taylor. She'd look a lot like her.
Well, yeah, like in the beginning, the intro, when they got this body of this so-called, this double, he had needles in his arms and stuff, like he was a drug addict, and I can't see Howard Hughes, although they portray him in movies, which I don't believe because they fluff things up so much. But yet, this guy who's smart, who lived this life, he was a smart businessman, would just turn into a vegetable. I don't buy that.
Well, look at the other, the people who took care of him, who had been on his payroll, who had been his very close daily companions for years. the Mormon aides. These are people who he had exclusive trust in, and I'm sure that they had tremendous loyalty to him. And yet this man, this emaciated, unkempt, unbathed, rotting corpse, was clearly not well taken care of. Now, would they do that to Howard Hughes?
Oh, absolutely not.
So there's so many things in this story, and I have to tell you, Mark particularly has continued to do research on this thing. When this book came out, we had people sort of coming out of the woodwork with Howard stories, and we have found some very interesting things. There'll likely be a continuation of this book. We've found some things I really wish we would have known before the first book was published, but the story hasn't ended. Let me just put it that way.
Well, that'd be
this
great.
will go on.
Let me ask you this. This is kind of a tangentially related question, but why did Howard Hughes have such a I don't want to say fascination, but why did he like Mormons so much? I say this having grown up in Salt Lake City, so there's a little context. Why, as a non-Mormon, by the way, so why did he like the Mormons so much? Just out of curiosity.
Well, he believed that they were, Mormons are I have never met a Mormon that I didn't like. They all seem to be very upstanding, very moral, just very good people, and they all seem to be pretty happy too, which I find interesting. But he found them very trustworthy, and I think there was a story about a specific person that started this. It's not in the book. Mark, do you remember if it was a specific aide that started that trend?
Well, there were several names that were mentioned in the book. I think he had about 5 Mormon aides, and we think that they all knew. And I don't remember their exact names. And they were working for a gentleman named Bill Gay, and then there were also 2 doctors, and we think they all knew it. But they were all very, very loyal to him. And the other thing he liked about the Mormons is that Howard didn't like drinking, didn't like alcohol.
Yeah, that's the explanation I've always heard, is that they were very clean living people.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And they knew how to keep their mouth shut. It's kind of like Eva. She knew how to keep her mouth shut.
Which is another the whole alcohol smoking thing. The real Werner Nicely drank and smoked.
And all of a sudden, the new one.
And when he came back, he was clean. And I think actually even in the medical tests later in his life, living under this ID of Werner Nicely entitled him to certain VA benefits, essentially. And when Nick went into the Veterans Hospital under Werner's credentials, they said that when they examined him, his lungs and things, he was not a smoker. So if Werner was a smoker and Nick had no damage from smoke, how did that happen?
Right.
That would be the smoking gun right there. No pun intended.
Well, that's good.
Oh, that was intended.
Has anyone tried to, since you guys came out with this book and, pretty much told the public that Howard Hughes died in 2001, has anybody tried to dig into Nick Nickleby's background, his family? Nickley. Or Nicely. Has anybody tried to dig into his background and his family's, like his descendants?
Yeah, Mark did.
Yes, yeah, I did. I went back to Ohio when this first started out and actually looked up his birth certificate to make sure I could find it. And then I actually talked to his brother in Ohio, and he said he was pretty skeptical of me, but he said that he had not talked to Werner since 1960. That was the last time that they talked. And he said, I tried to find him when our parents died in the late 60s and early 70s and could never do it. I could never find him. And again, it all fit what Eva said. And then I also was able to actually talk to his son, Gary, and he's the one who confirmed to me that his dad was in the C.I.A. Worked for the C.I.A. while in Panama. And so we have communicated with some of the family members there. There was another incident here that a lady came to us about a year ago, And she said that in Alabama, in Troy, Alabama, that she was working for a drugstore there and taking medications out to the elderly. And she got to know Nick and Eva very, very well. And she said that, how tall he was. He's 6'4" gentleman. He said his hands were burned. He said he'd been in an aircraft accident, and she just didn't believe him. And he told her that he was Howard Hughes, and she just didn't believe it. And as we talked, she got the book. She had not read the book at this point in time, and she got the book and read it when we traded messages a little bit later and says, oh, my goodness, that's exactly what they were doing. She just couldn't figure it out at that point in time in Alabama, but she knew there was all kind of mystery in those two individuals, and then find out, lo and behold, what he had told her was absolutely true.
And the burn scars matched.
Here's
from the ones from Hughes's, I think it was 1946 or 48, the plane crash in Beverly Hills. He was badly burned, and the burn scars on Nick are in the same places as the burn scars on Hughes.
Knowing that Howard Hughes was an avid flyer and he loved to be up in the air, did Nick have a similarity? Did he own a Cessna by any chance, or did he take up flying? Or was that he just completely ended it?
Well, he was masquerading as an aircraft maintenance supervisor. That was what his credentials said, although Eva said he never actually had a real job or went anywhere, but he had credentials that said he was an aviation maintenance supervisor.
And also Werner Nicely, he went into the military in 1942 and was in aircraft operations. And Werner Nicely was a really smart guy also, but he went into aircraft operations during World War II, and that followed him. And evidently, I don't know when that link came in with the C.I.A. Must have been in the mid '50s or something like that. That followed him around then with that, and he was dealing with aircraft for several years after that also.
Here's the I just got to ask this. Here's the $1 million question once again, no pun intended. What happened to all his money? We know he was rich, had a lot of money from his parents in the oil business. Mm-hmm. What happened upon 2001 his death? Did Eva see anything like that coming her way?
No, she didn't, and there's a lot of interesting things regarding the death. There was a lot of money that, there were a number of challenges against the wills, and it went on for years. In one of the wills, there was a substantial amount of money left to the Hughes Medical Institute in Florida, and a doctor that was one of the people we believe was in on the whole thing was appointed to a position at that hospital. And so once again, it's a theory, can't prove it, but we think that he had kind of arranged that when the stand-in died, that he'd be able to funnel money through the hospital to get money back to him. But what happened was the will got overturned, and it ended up in the court forever.
Right. I think it was eventually, they finally, when in 1983, they finally settled it, and his heirs ended up with the state, and to this day, there's a Hughes presence, corporate presence here in Las Vegas.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I want to bring one other thing up before I forget here, because Mark mentioned Werner's brother, Donnell, right?
Donnell, yes.
Yeah. He said the last time that he spoke with Werner that he was involved in some sort of clandestine thing that involved, he said he believed it involved Cuba. Well, along about that time was the Bay of Pigs invasion, where we failed in an attempt to invade Cuba. The Bay of Pigs invasion was headed up by Robert Mayhew, who, after he left the CIA, went on to run the Hughes Empire. So Werner had worked for Mayhew, and when whatever eventually did happen to Werner happened, Mayhew would have known that there was an unoccupied military ID laying around.
Yeah, there's apparently a story that Hughes was involved in the missing minutes of the last Watergate tape. Do you know anything about that?
Doug, let me take this one.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Let me take this. Okay, Eva left Nick. This was June of 1972, and they'd been living in Panama, and it was a hard relationship. And Eva left him, and planning to just leave him for good. And she went to Flagstaff, Arizona, and found an apartment there. And then about 6 weeks later, Nick now shows up in Arizona. And Eva was a little peeved with him because she didn't really want to see him again. And she said, "What have you been doing, Nick?" And he said, "Well, I had some business to attend to." And as I researched this back, I said, "Eva, do you know what was going on in June of '72?" And she said, "No, I really don't." I said, "It was Watergate. And Hunt and Liddy, who were arrested for Watergate, worked directly for Robert Bennett, who worked directly for Howard Hughes. And in H.R. Halterman's book, he says that the 17-and-a-half-minute lapse of Evelyn Wood is the Howard Hughes connection to Watergate. And there's been other connections. If you just Google Howard Hughes and Watergate, I mean, you kind of get a pretty good connection there. And so what had happened here, she had left, and we find this quite a bit. If he had business to attend to, that was when they weren't together.
Huh.
And she would leave him at times, sometimes for 9 months, and that's when he would go fly airplanes in England and things like that. But there's a pattern there when he would leave or she would leave him, he would then go have some kind of business dealings in somewhere with someone.
Wow, that's fascinating. When I seen that, I was like, God, this guy is involved in everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Hughes had direct financial dealings. He was a big supporter of Richard Nixon financially. So that all of this happens at the same time.
And he Howard wanted the bomb testing to stop in Nevada.
Right. He was a big opponent of that.
Oh my goodness, yes. And he wanted Nixon to stop it, and Nixon wouldn't stop it. So we think this is kind of Howard's way of getting even with Richard Nixon.
Huh.
All right, I got to ask this. Going back to Eva, and we were talking about him leaving a lot to go basically play and do and conduct business. How was their marriage and overall? What was it? 31 years together?
It was a rough 31 years for Eva, because his personality would change. He could go from a very friendly, charming man to just a verbally vicious man, and Eva never knew when that was going to happen. And there would be times that she would just have to leave, and sometimes she'd leave for 9 months at a time, 6 months at a time, so forth. She just had to leave to get away from him, to gain her sanity back. But they always got back together. She loved him. Mm-hmm. He was a hard guy to love, but she loved him, and he loved her too. If you can say that that Howard Hughes could love someone, he loved her, and that's why they kept getting together.
And one of the difficulties here is that, not surprisingly, we see all of the sort of weird characteristics in Nick that you see in Howard Hughes.
Right.
He wears gloves in the house. He's germ-phobic.
Right.
He has all of the little sort of nervous tics that Hughes had. He has a hearing problem that Hughes had. He has severe farsightedness to the point that he has to read everything with a magnifying glass, as Hughes did. But along with the problem with the hearing, for example, he would get, if he didn't hear something, he'd get angry, and she'd say one thing, he'd think she said something else, and so he has all of these strange characteristics of Howard Hughes that are pretty darn hard to live with, and she had to endure that.
So were these eccentricities, were they just basically his personality? The narrative has always been that they were basically byproducts of his drug use later in life. But this was just kind of who he was?
Well, his mother was exceptionally... his mother was a little different to begin with. And a lot of the phobia about germs and things, I think, comes from her. And his father was kind of a tough guy, and I think some of the hardness came from him. So I think that's part of what made the idea of him going completely insane plausible.
Right.
Because there was enough of the truth there that you could build something on. There was enough eccentricity there where you didn't have to really, push too hard to get people to believe he might have gone over the edge completely.
Being an eccentric person as he was, and that he pretty much killed off himself as Howard Hughes, I don't see how this man who loved the nightlife, who loved that life to begin with, could just completely leave it behind until his death in 2001.
You'd be surprised. People get tired.
Well, he'd sort of started withdrawing in the 40s and 50s. He'd already begun his withdrawal from society. So it wasn't like he was out partying, up into the 70s and then suddenly disappeared.
Yeah, when you look at the list of women he dated, he probably just figured he couldn't top that.
Probably. That's what I'm thinking about.
Let's see. Ava Gardner, Gene Tierney.
I'm sitting
yeah,
here
I'm
thinking
good.
about his women.
I'm done. Can't do any better than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Eva would say that he would get up in the middle of the night and do his business. And that's when he'd make his phone calls and things like that, which is exactly what Howard did, was get up in the middle of the night to do whatever business that he needed to do.
That makes me laugh, because that's basically what I do.
Yeah, right.
Shame on you.
Maybe I'm the heir of Howard Hughes. I don't know.
Where's the money?
Yep.
But while he was married to Eva for the 31 years, did he, minus the 10 years in, 1972 to probably 1980s, did he disappear like in the 1990s or late 1980s, like for, hours on end or days on end as well?
They were living in the woods of Alabama from 1981 on. And I asked Eva, I said, Eva, did he make contact with anyone? And she said, yes, he would. He'd prepare a postcard and send it out. And I asked her, did you ever see the postcards? No, he wouldn't let me see them. Do you know where they went? No, I wasn't sure. But I knew someone was making contact back with him. And then he would just leave. There'd be times he would leave. He'd be gone all day long, typically not overnight, but all day long. And she asked him, she said, well, where have you been today? And he said, I climbed a tree and fell out of a tree and was unconscious.
Good excuse.
And then he comes back. And so he always had these excuses,
right.
But someone would come after he sent this postcard out. Someone would come and make contact with him.
That's fascinating.
So he was still making contact in there, even as we're hiding in this wooded area. In a travel trailer for 25 years.
That's
that was one of the things that kind of got me. Mark and I were visiting Eva, and I should say that Eva saved everything. Mark was introduced to me by a mutual friend of ours who at the time was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And this is a pretty weird story, clearly. And when my friend called, he said, we want to come out and see you. I don't want to tell you over the phone what this is. We want to see you. Well, when he came out with Mark had this big pile of documentation because Eva saved everything. Had it not been for the big pile of documentation, I probably would have thought they were crazy, just like now some people think both of us are crazy. But I forgot what my point was from getting on this thing. But there was enough material there. There is so much. Oh, it was the helicopter. That was the way. We were visiting Eva, and we were going through all of these things, and as Mark said earlier, she was very articulate, and no story ever changed. And out of nowhere in this conversation, she says, yes, he would send the postcards, and then the people would come. And then every once in a while, a helicopter would land out on the property, and he'd go out and meet the helicopter.
Oh, wow.
Well, for some reason, that one just was, for me, a bridge too far. I said, wait a minute, I'm not... that one I can't believe. Mm-hmm. And I politely said, are you sure about that or something like that? And she said, oh, yeah. In fact, one day I took a picture of the helicopter when it was landing. And now, as I said, she'd saved everything. And so Mark had this whopping great pile of pictures. And I said, Mark, did you ever find a picture of a helicopter? And he went back, and sure enough, he found the picture that she took of the helicopter.
Wow.
And she had never mentioned that before. I think the book was almost finished at that point, wasn't it, Mark?
Yeah, it was close to end at that point.
You know, some people. I'm sorry. Some people. It's just for me. This is really. This is an interesting question, and I really want to know. Maybe. You know, people try to get evidence if a person is the legitimate person that they say they are. Having all this information and material collected over the years, was there any kind of handwriting analysis taken, perhaps?
I looked at handwriting. We went down many paths here, and I did look at handwriting. We could never get the handwriting to match, and the reason why I believe was that I don't think Howard Hughes ever wrote anything. I think he had someone else write everything that he did. I think it was the Age wrote everything, and so I'm not sure we have an exact, definite handwriting from Howard Hughes. In the books, it shows handwriting in there. However, I would almost bet that that is handwriting from one of his aides or somebody else. And I did go to a handwriting expert and showed him some things, and he said, you know, if you really want to, you can change your handwriting.
Right.
I talked to Gary Nice and said, you know, what was your dad's writing? He said, my dad always printed everything. Everything was printed. And as I found Nick's stuff, well, it wasn't printed. It was like cursive. But it wasn't the same cursive as the books show what Howard's writing is. So I couldn't really go down. That didn't lead me anywhere at all.
Right.
But there are some examples of his sort of filing system, which was, you know, paper bags and anything he could get his hands on, that do show his complete lack of being able to spell anything. That was one of the things Hughes was noted for, is that he really couldn't, you know, he really didn't spell very well. And Nick couldn't spell, but Gary said his father, you know, his spelling was just fine.
Mark and Douglas, we are coming up at the end of the show.
Quick question. Let me ask this, Mike. When can we expect the second book? Kevin Stott asked me that, so he's one to blame.
We were shooting for April here. I don't know, Mark.
Yeah, we're hoping we can add a couple more chapters onto this with information that we've learned since the book came out, and next spring.
Well, cool.
And where can people get the book?
Amazon.com or WriteLife, WRITELIFE.com. Forgot how to spell right.
Maybe you're Howard Hughes.
I know, Nick.
All right, we only got like a minute here, and I got to ask you this: since the release of your book and the revelation out there, what is the scrutiny are you guys getting for this?
Well, we've got a lot of people have called. We've got calls from people who, from a family that knew them back there, and they sort of reiterated, oh, that's who those guys were who were following them around in regard to the aides. We've got calls from a lot of people who perhaps aren't wrapped too tight. That's happened, as one would imagine. But and medical people, we've had people approach us who had worked for Hughes, who all say, oh, yeah, that sounds like him.
All right, guys, thank you for being on the program. Mark and Douglas, a fascinating story, and I'm sure everybody out there is intrigued. They're on their computers like, what? He did not die, and, you know. But thanks again for being on the program as well. Join us back here Friday as we have Nikola Tesla talk about how the mind is a bunch of smoke and mirrors and how society is basically playing a biggest prank on your psyche, and that's back here Friday. Everybody out there, once again, thank you again, Mark and Douglas. Stay safe.
Happy
and gobble,
Thanksgiving.
gobble, gobble. See you back here Friday. Goodbye, everybody. Welcome back to another brand new and conspiratorial edition of the Paranormal and Beyond. But first, be sure to check us out at Knight's Paranormal Research Society.com, where you can link up to all the past shows by simply clicking on that archive link above. That's Knight's Paranormal Research Society.com. Ever want to be an actor? Well, here's your chance, because by logging on to Hollywood-bound Acting Academy.com, you would get the best in coaches when it comes to acting. Once again, that's Hollywood-bound Acting Academy.com. Special shout out to all those listening worldwide through the KLAV 1230 AM.com website, and all those driving around in the Vegas Valley listening to us on your stereos. I'm your host, Michael Knight. Joining alongside of me is your hostess, Lindsay Knight, and also in the studios, David Gleason and Kevin Stott of the EOG Sports Hour, which can be heard here Monday through Friday from 10 to 11. Welcome to the program, people.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Woo! Jesus. Try
Are you
saying
all right?
that 10 times.
That was good. You killed it, man.
Yeah, it's like I don't have time to breathe. I'm physically shaking right now.
James Brown thinks you're a hardworking man. You're now the hardest working man in show business.
Oh, yeah. All right, we got a great show. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the whole Howard Hughes thing.
I put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it. And I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back. And I mean it.
A body racked with head injuries, open sores, bone fractures, and broken needles in his arms. An apparent victim of terrible neglect and abuse. But this was no ordinary derelict. This was Howard Hughes.
They said, if you took one look at me, you could never represent me.
How could this happen to the richest man in America?
Broadcasting live from the dark and cold dungeons deep beneath the KLAV studios in Las Vegas, Nevada. Prepare yourselves to be taken away into another dimension, as we now have control over your thoughts.
And retired Major General Mark Musick will be joining us on the program to share a shocking story of a recluse, wealthy man who was unable to escape his famous life, but in the end did so with the assistance of the CIA and also help from a loving wife who knew how to keep secrets. So get ready to hear the secret life of Howard Hughes when we return right here on the Talk of Las Vegas, KLAV 1230 AM.
Your ticket to the unknown is at Knight's Paranormal Research Society.com. UFOs, ghosts, aliens, hauntings, mysterious places, and more can be found at Knight's Paranormal Research Society.com. Knights with a K, Paranormal Research Society.com. Based out of Las Vegas, Nevada, Knights Paranormal Research Society is owned and operated by the renowned brother and sister team of Michael and Lindsay Knight. Seeing is believing. And at Knight's Paranormal Research Society.com, you're going to believe. Join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight, for the Paranormal and Beyond. Join host Michael Knight and Lindsay Knight as they investigate the unexplained and most controversial mysteries of the world. The Paranormal and Beyond, where the paranormal lives on and conspiracies exposed. The Paranormal and Beyond, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight. Brought to you by Knight's Paranormal Research Society.com.
Just because you've seen it in the news doesn't mean it's real.
So you're telling me you got physically attacked by a ghost?
Like, I can tell you right now, I believe in the paranormal more than I believe in our government.
There are so many mysteries out there that are still yet to be explained.
You folks
have some of your facts wrong, and you just keep talking about generalities.
With all due respect, sir, you have not brought anything to the table to prove us wrong.
This is the Paranormal and Beyond, and it's your show. Call us at 731-1230. Here again, Michael Knight and Lindsay Knight. Fears and perspective of the unexplained world you dare not speak of. With your hosts, Lindsay Knight and Michael Knight. Ladies and gentlemen, we now open the gates to the paranormal and beyond.
Broadcasting live from the KLAV studios in Las Vegas, Nevada, this is the Paranormal and Beyond. On December 24th, 1905, Eileen Stone Gano would give birth to a boy who would soon later grow up to revolutionize the entire world as we know it. As an American business magnate, investor, aviator, aerospace engineer, filmmaker, and philanthropist, there's no doubt that business tycoon and icon Howard Hughes, on which his contributions and impact on today's society cannot be ignored. However, what has gone ignored is the secret life of Howard Hughes himself and how he fooled the entire world by faking his death in 1976. In a moment, special guest Douglas Wellman